welcome to Level 1 Restoration Behind the Scenes. We have something here today that I think is pretty awesome. We hope you like it. It is a 1972 Ford Courier Baja racing truck. So we restored this vehicle for our customer Wayne Schmeckley out of Colorado here. And prior to that, it was owned by a guy, Andrew Norton from BajaBroncos.com fame. He knows all about off-road racing Broncos, but this being a Ford product falls right in line. And what we'll talk about is how this car won some of its races. We have some pretty cool history. We got some neat old photos. And so that's how we knew how to restore it, was some of this cool historic pieces of documentation we have. But Andrew had this car for 4 or 5 years, and he got it from a family that was around all this racing, Haliburta family. They kind of originally saved it. And so anyway, fast forward, Wayne buys it because it goes really well with all of his Baja Bronco and Bill Strop memorabilia and vehicles and stuff like that. So it's, like I mentioned, it's a 1972 Ford Courier. And what was going on at the time was these little trucks came in. I mean, it was nothing. They raced full-size Ford trucks, and they could race just about anything. They had a class for almost every car. But NORA, the racing organization at the time, made a class for these light trucks. And so there were 6 or 7 of these little Couriers built, and Strop had a couple of team trucks, and then these guys here that had this truck had most of it, with the exception, I think, the wiring done by Bill Strop. They built the engine there and the chassis and the suspension, and we'll talk about it more in detail, but these wheels were manufactured specifically for this program of racing these little light trucks in the Baja races. And this one had a couple of wins. It competed in the Baja 500 and the Baja 1000 races. In 1973, it won the a Long Beach, or no, I'm sorry, it was a Riverside. It won the Riverside Grand Prix event, and I have a list of them. We'll go over that, the race wins, here in a minute. But so this car obviously was banged up, right? It was an off-road racing vehicle. Luckily, a lot of the cool items survived, like the shovel, if they had to dig themselves out of a big sand bar or wherever they would get themselves into some trouble. It has a speed release for the spare tire, a toolbox full of whatever tools they would need when they were out, clear out away in the middle of nowhere. They had to make repairs, the driver and the co-pilot on site. So a lot of that stuff was saved with this vehicle, and it raced real steady from 73 to 76, and then it raced, took a little bit of a break, and then some other guys resurrected it and raced it into the 80s. So there's pictures of it all through its period of time, but a successful truck. It did well. What's really cool is that this is the only one that's ever been found. Of the 6 or 7 race Couriers that were made, this is it. And like a Baja Bronco, an off-road Baja Bronco, they literally made a street version of this. It's an almost unknown piece of Ford, Bill Strop racing history. So they made upwards of 15 street versions of this off-road racing truck. There's one of those known to exist. Probably almost all of them were in California, but who knows? So if anybody has a really interesting early Courier pickup truck that has like an off-road steering wheel or some of the other items that they might have had for this, that would be a pretty cool vehicle to get a hold of and maybe restore and save that history of that. But anyway, this vehicle, like I said, is a full frame-off, fresh restoration. We have a lot of people that we worked with on this. One thing you can see right off the bat, this is all hand-painted. the decals, of course, are decals, and they're vintage from the 70s. And then the number on the side of the truck and the names and all of that stuff, that's all been hand painted by a local guy here to us, Joe Brocksterman with Speedway Graphics. He's an awesome guy. We do a lot of work with him. We had the wheels restored locally here, but the paint and body work, and then all of the component restorations and the details and all that, that was all done by a couple of the people that we sub a lot of work out to. No way could we keep up with the volume of work that we have here all by ourselves. So we've gathered a phenomenal group of subbers. And Byron did the metal work on this truck, and he did almost all of the little component stuff that we will take a look at later that's in the bed of the truck. And then a lot of the electronic stuff too. And then it went up to my old boss from way back when, Matt Halverson at Nice Rides Restoration. Him and his guy, Tim, put all of that stuff together, did the paint on it, and worked with Greeley Automotive Machine, and they did the engine, and the transmission was just sent out to be double checked. And so they brought the whole thing together to how you see it. It was just delivered to us a couple of days ago, and we wanted to have a quick look at it. All right, let's take a look at the powertrain on this guy here. A little overhead cam 4-cylinder engine. And in this off-road racing, obviously, a Bronco with a 400 horsepower, V8 is going to be quite a lot faster than this. So they had all these different classes that these little trucks would participate in. And this was considered, it was class 7, which was an entry-level class. And the hopes would be to keep the cost down a little bit so people could get in it, get hooked, and go on and race with bigger and faster things if they wanted to in the future. But so back in the day, the sponsors were really involved much more than I'd say like in today's drag racing. You don't get anything unless you win a race from a sponsor. But in the case of this vehicle, Champion Spark Plugs literally paid to have all of the engine work done for this. And that was all done at Bill Stropp's shop and out in California. So that would have been a little bit of head work, a different camshaft, a header, and then they used a 2-barrel carburetor, which would be like a standard carburetor on a Ford Bronco or a pickup truck, or it's just a basic Ford 2-barrel carburetor. Pretty good size. It's quite big for a 4-cylinder, but with probably a little added compression and camshaft, it probably was a really good fit. And so that's exactly how we have it. And then you can see under the hood here, there's modifications where there's 2 shocks, at each wheel, and all of that was Bill Stropp modifications. In the interior compartment, the firewall was totally redone, and the wheel wells made a lot of extra clearance for if this came over a ramp or something. And so they literally modified the body a little bit to make clearance. And of course, the fender wells are much larger than a stock Courier would be, and the rears are flared a little bit. There's a few things you'll notice on the outside of the car, but wipers were important here, squirters, all that stuff functions and works. It looks like the radiator and the fan, all that's pretty basic stock Ford Courier stuff. It has an external oil filter that they could access right here under the engine compartment. And then, of course, one really sweet detail on this car is they had maps of the races. So I don't know the exact history of if they participated in a race, then they added it to the hood, or exactly what the art, idea was behind this, other than they would know what to expect. So if you're racing along, you probably would recognize some of these areas, and that could be helpful for you to know how much farther you had to go. But this is pretty neat here. A little mermaid thing on this. Canon is one of the, Blast Ltd was one of the sponsors and companies. This was along with the exterior hand-painted letters. This was all done by our guy, Joe Brocksterman here. And he just did an awesome job. What a detail to include in the restoration of this vehicle. No expense was spared on this project, which is very clear when you take a look at it. Okay, let's take a look at the cabin of this Courier pickup here. So we were lucky enough to have all the original gauges and switch panels and all of the things that came with this truck. They really typically don't break, so they kept them. So these are all the Stewart Warner gauges, and this is all like aviation style, you know, attachments and things like that. And you have, you know, oil pressure, fuel pressure, water temperature, and then an alternator light if the alternator voltage is low, or if you have a low oil pressure, they have a light for that to let those drivers know. And of course, these had co-pilots, so 2 racing seats in here. As far as we could tell, that the 4-speed transmission is just a stock Ford, Mazda, basically, transmission. The Baja steering wheel, just like a Baja Bronco would have, a racing one, and then that oversized tachometer there. And other than that, everything is stripped out of here, just the bare basic essentials. But this is pretty involved here, and all of these little fuses and these aircraft lights here, this test, when it's all powered up, you have your floodlights and your low beams. They actually had a horn. People and cows and all kinds of things would be out in their way. And then all the different lights, instrument panel lights, wipers. And then, of course, you just have a starter and a fuel pump light and a test light for each and every one of these things. They would let you know if it was functioning. They really needed a lot of that stuff in these long 500 and 1,000 mile races. So this whole setup here came with this truck and was painstakingly restored. It was quite a chore, but wow, it's wonderful. And again, Byron labored over all of these things, and then Matt and Tim as well really put in a lot of effort on this. Just incredible piece of history here. All right, now let's take a look at the back of this truck, and this is where all the utility stuff is at. Pretty neat stuff. So we worked off of the pictures that we will take a look at. But this shovel, we really only barely had a picture of it. We had the bracket on the front, and we had the remnants of the tie down here. So literally, we found a shovel we liked and made the wooden part, and this was all restored and rebuilt by one of our great subbers, Byron Hamilton, did a lot of, pretty much all of this detail work. And it was really mind-bending, the amount of work that he did on this thing. This was much more difficult than restoring a car. I mean, you could restore a GTO or a Camaro or something. It would be a lot less pain than what we went through in restoring this, but then the satisfaction is really high too. This little thing here, you're looking at this vintage thermos cooler. This is a water line. This is literally what these guys would drink on one of these long Baja races for extended periods of time. They would just stick that in their mouth and drink a little ice water out of here, or whatever they wanted to put in there. This big thing in the middle clearly is the fuel cell. So there's like a rubber bladder type of a fuel cell inside of here that this feeds. And then there's dual electric fuel pumps and a Fram fuel filter. And those are pretty neat. And again, we had to source a lot of this, you know, these vintage parts, because some of it came with the truck and some of it didn't. One of the items, this did come with the truck. The spare hold down, that was all here with the truck yet. You know, the guys could, speed was of the most important thing, and they could quickly jump out and get this spare tire off of there just by spinning that tie down. And then we have a scissor jack over here on the other inner fender well, and it just, you pull one pin and lift that jack out of here. These guys would be able to change a tire quite quickly out in the desert on the run. And then in the back we have a toolbox, and that would just be all the tools they needed, wrenches and all of that stuff for any repairs they might have made. And then here we have the battery cover, and the battery sits down inside the wheel well here. So that's pretty easy. It only took me a minute to tell you all of that. The amount of time and research in finding some of these parts and or restoring these parts was just amazing. And again, another testament to my customer Wayne Schmeckley and the talented guys. First Byron did a bunch of this work, and then another shop that we have a really close working relationship with kind of assembled everything here, did the paint work also, and just kind of finished it and made it run. Matt and Tim up at Nice Rides Restoration are awesome too. They do a lot of cool stuff with us on a regular basis, and those guys are just terrific. But again here, this is the, you know, the bed portion of this truck represents weeks and weeks and weeks and even probably months of effort when you look at the paint and bodywork and the fasteners, and it's just an amazing sight to see. Okay, let's take a look specifically at the wheels and tires on this. So, like we had said, they made 6 or 7 of these vehicles, and Bill Strop and, you know, all of these Baja racing guys had a lot of wheel manufacturer contacts and stuff like that. And I don't know the origination of how they discovered these tires, but these particular tires are manufactured in Japan, and they're not made for the US market at all. But somehow these guys figured these out, and they would run these with very low pressure. And this represented part of the suspension on these trucks, because the technology isn't anything like it is today for these. It was quite jarring, in fact. But this is a pretty cool tire. We were able to get a set of these. Andrew Norton from BajaBroncos.com found these and had them, you know, imported here into the United States. They're 13-inch tires, and these wheels were made specifically for this Courier racing project back in 72, 73. And what makes them so unique is, for one, they're 13-inch, and you might find a 13-inch mag wheel for, oh, I don't know, whatever had 13-inch wheels, Vegas or something like that in the 70s. But this has the regular Ford 5-on-5.5 bolt pattern. So we literally have the only known existing wheels, and we have, I think we have 9 of them all together, maybe a 10th one, but I think it's just 9. But anyway, we literally have these restored, and in the strop color, this insert was always painted, and we of course redid all that stuff. But pretty special wheels and tires. It would be almost impossible to replicate at least the wheels. And then the tires are pretty tough too, because you have to import them from Japan. And they were originally like a farm implement tire is what their application was. But they made it all the way to the States for off-road racing in the early 70s. That's generally what we know about this. Had some cool wins. Had a heck of a neat life. A lot of photos were taken and stuff. So it's a cool piece of history that most of you have probably never heard of before. And if you like this type of thing, please subscribe and like and all that stuff, and comment. Maybe you knew of one of these or had some off-road racing history. We love those comments and to hear about it. And so we really appreciate your feedback and involvement. And once again, thanks for watching Level 1 Restoration Behind the Scenes.